All right, so I'll start at the beginning. Did a lot of moving as a kid. I think I moved something like 10 places before I was in the 6th grade. So a lot of times during my childhood, uprooted from a group of friends to a group of friends, and it just happened a lot. So I think that had a lot to do with why I was really angry and rebellious during my adolescence. My dad also was a hard worker, but probably worked a little too much, so I didn't have really a close relationship with my dad. He was there, but he wasn't really there, as much as I probably needed at that time. So once I was past 6th grade, I just went through a real hard rebellious cycle. I got really heavily involved in drugs. Started smoking pot when I was in 6th grade. Started doing acid in the 7th grade. 8th grade. Heavy drinking during all these years as well. So there was just this constant spiral aimed towards rebellion because I was such like an angry kid. And, when you think of what I went through, it wasn't nearly as bad as what some people, but it was enough to get me to where I was really angry and rebellious. Regretfully, my role model was Jim Morrison of the Doors, who was a big partier. And so that just, I looked up to him, and he basically, died at a young age because of abuse of his body from drugs and alcohol. So, I became, suicidal. I used to just, cut my arms, watch myself bleed. I once put a loaded gun in my mouth. I was just somebody that was so angry inside, and I was just spiraling out of control. So, this happened until around the age of 19, and 19 is when I was able to sober up finally. I'd say from the age of 17 to 19, I really wanted to stop, but I couldn't. But for the grace of God, I was able to sober up by the age of 19, but I still was not a believer, was not a Christian at that point. Then I just went to different vices to try to fill a void of unhappiness. So I started doing triathlons, and I competed in 7 Ironman triathlons. I basically did that for several years. And then there was a phase in my life where I went through skydiving, the rush of skydiving, thought that would make me happy. And then, of course, I went into the TV world where, I went to college to be a broadcast journalist and to go into TV so I could be a sports anchor. And I thought, man, if I'm on TV and people know who I am, and, that will give me the happiness. When my TV career began, it was behind the scenes. I was in Los Angeles. I was working for Fox Sports. And during that time, I suddenly lost the ability to clearly communicate. Like I would stumble on my words all the time. I couldn't just pronounce the words the way they're supposed to. It sounded like I was drunk half the time. And I was so frustrated because, of course, I want to go to TV. I can't talk anymore. That's a problem. One time when I was running, this is the same time when I was doing the triathlon hobby, I prayed to God while I was running. I said, God, I know you're real. If you just give me my voice back, I'll follow you. And so in the next couple of months, he ends up giving my voice back. I end up getting a job where I'm actually on TV in South Dakota. I move over there, but I didn't follow through with my commitment. I didn't follow him. During the couple years I was in South Dakota, lots of times when I was running, I felt God sort of reminding me of that promise I made to him, but it didn't happen. Fast forward to 2007. I'm in South Carolina on TV. One day, I'm driving home from visiting my parents in Washington, D.C., back to South Carolina. And the road on I-95 in the North Carolina area was down to 2 lanes because of construction. And there were 2 trucks that were basically riding right next to each other in the same, between those 2 lanes. So they had a big bottleneck of traffic behind. And I was so frustrated because I was one of those, impatient drivers. I was 29 years old, and I was so frustrated. So finally, the truck in the slow lane, the right lane, barely went in front of the truck that was in the fast lane, clogging up traffic. And I went and I cut off the truck clogging up traffic and just started driving on. Suddenly, moments later, I'll never forget this, I see out of my peripheral, the truck that I just cut off was actually in the shoulder driving next to me. And he ends up turning his truck into me. And the bolts at the front of his tire, I'm not even sure what they're called, but there are these long bolts that sort of came out. It went into the back of my driver's side back passenger door. And it just it crunched in the door. I could hear it sort of tearing up the car. And I remember just taking my foot off the brake. I didn't know the car was going to flip or what. And the truck then took the lane back from me because he was obviously quite enraged that I took it and cut him off like that. And I ended up just getting my phone. I called the cops. The cops pulled this guy over around Lumberton, North Carolina, I remember. They talk to me. I tell him everything that happened. He goes and talks to the driver. He comes back to me, and the cop said to me, he said, listen, I totally believe you. I have no doubt that you're telling the truth, but I can't prove it. He says he doesn't know what you're talking about. You must have actually drove into him, and that was it. So that night, I drive home. The car was able to drive, right? It went through the door, didn't hit the tire, so it took me home. I couldn't sleep that night, and I felt just God wrestling with me. And finally, at like 2 in the morning, I finally just said, all right, I give up. Lord, please come into my life. Please be my Savior. And it was just a point at the age of 29, God had been so patient with me, and I finally fulfilled my commitment. All right, I'm ready to go. I don't want to live alone away from you anymore. And by the way, during those years that I lived alone, a lot of the rational that I was going through in my mind when I was rationalizing, I said, listen, I want to be able to live the sin life. If I have a girlfriend, I want to be able to do whatever with her. If I don't want to all of a sudden live this life where I can't enjoy the sins, because I always felt they would fill that void. I didn't realize that had nothing to do with it. So anyway, the next morning after I gave my life to the Lord, I woke up and a couple things happened immediately, which are amazing. Number one, I was instantly cured of swearing. Like, I grew up in the Northeast, so I said GDMF all the time. I was completely foul-mouthed, and I was constantly cursing, and suddenly it was gone. It was like a spirit was gone, right? So that was one amazing thing. The second thing, I totally stopped watching porn, which for guys is sort of a big deal because a lot of guys do that, and our culture promotes it, for crying out loud. So it went from just like an overnight where that left me as well. And then there's one miracle that really stands out, and I know why God did it in hindsight, but I'll tell the quick story. I was in TV, so I'd go to work around noon, and I'd come back around midnight. That was just the TV hours. And before I left, I had 2 dogs. I always let them go to the bathroom, then I would come back at night and obviously let them go once I got home. When I got home one night, the door to my apartment was wide open. I said, oh my gosh, my dogs must be, gone. So I walk in. The pit bull, of course, is just sitting right there on the couch because he doesn't want to go anywhere. But I had a miniature pinscher, and he had vanished. And I'm like, I can't imagine. The door could be open for 12 hours at this point. I don't know where he is. So I do what any dog owner would do. I got like the dog treats. I got a whistle. I did everything I could. We started driving around the neighborhood, even at past midnight, calling for the dog. After 20 minutes, I gave up. I went home. I just said, I'm getting to bed. And I was trying to sleep. And suddenly, God gave me a vision of where the dog was. And let me preface this. I'm not one of those people that get visions. It's happened maybe a couple times. But at this moment, he gave me a vision where the dog was. And it was at the busiest intersection in Florence, South Carolina. I think it's something like 2 miles away from where I lived. And I'm like, all right, that's ridiculous. I'm going to bed. So I just tried to sleep, but I couldn't sleep. So I thought, all right, fine. I'm going to drive there. I get up. It's probably like 1 in the morning at this point. I drive a couple miles away, and I arrive. And the minute I pull up to the intersection, in the busiest intersection in town, the dog walks in front of my car. So it was just an impossible thing that happened, and I was just blown away. And to this day, I know God did that because I've never been able to doubt the miracles he's done, and that particular miracle he showed me. It really helped my faith at that time. So I end up coming here, and one of the things that was really interesting when he saved me is he got me involved or put something in my heart really to work with kids in the inner city. I never did anything for anyone before when I was 29, but once I got saved, he put that in my heart. So when I came here, I moved down to West Palm Beach. I started, working or volunteering at Urban Youth Impact and just working with the kids. And I've seen like a lot of miracles during my time there. One in particular, there's this kid named Johnny who was really, really a tough kid. So anytime he would come on the weekly field trips and go out, he was like the one kid trying to blow everything up and getting in fights with kids, being defiant to the adults, just doing anything he could to ruin things. So I finally had to tell him, hey, Johnny, you can't come back anymore because you're just blowing things up. So one day, I'm in Dunbar, and I'm just looking for some of the other guys we're going to hang out with, and he comes walking up to me. He's probably a 6th grader this time. And I think to myself, oh, great, here comes Johnny. And so Johnny, but before he gets to me, I hear God say, you're going to mentor that kid. And again, I don't hear God speak to me that audibly very often. Maybe it happened a couple times in my life, but it was clear as day at that moment. And my immediate reaction was that was the last kid I wanted to work with or talk to. So I said, all right, hey, Johnny, how you doing? You want to go to a baseball game this weekend? And he said, absolutely. So I'm going to the Dodger game that weekend when they're playing the Marlins. And before we go into the game, we go out to eat at like a Subway near the Dolphin Stadium. And we get food. And I say, Johnny, just please pray for the food before we eat. And he's like, I'm not praying. I don't believe in God. And I say, all right, well, just humor me. Just pray for me, and then, we'll eat and go to the game. So he just bows his head. He says, God, if you're real, you'll give me a baseball. Amen. So we go in the seats, and I remember there were outfield seats. I thought maybe we'll get lucky. A home run ball will come near us. And we're walking down the row, and it's just Johnny and me. And then all of a sudden, I see a guy selling beer following down the row. I remember thinking, that's weird, because this kid's like a 6th grader. I didn't even look at the beer guy, so I didn't want anything. And I sit down, Johnny sits down to my left, and the beer guy is coming down. He puts his beer down about 2 seats from Johnny. He reaches into a chair right next to Johnny. He picks up a baseball, he hands it to Johnny, and he leaves. He doesn't say a word to either of us. And I can't even believe what's happening. I'm trying to stay composed. I have goosebumps everywhere. Johnny's jumping up and down, looking at the sky, saying, you're real, you're real. But it was one of the really, really cool miracles I saw, and I'll never forget. Okay, several months later with Johnny, we're doing a paintball outing. And as usual, he's getting into trouble with the other kids, and I'm really getting on his case because of it. And this volunteer who only volunteered one time with us and had never met anyone in the group before calls me the next day. And he says, remember that guy, Johnny, that you were, getting on and who was really struggling? Well, God told me that he's been sexually abused. And I remember thinking, okay, I'll talk to him about it. I don't know how weird this is going to come across, but I'll tell Johnny what you said. So I went and met with Johnny the next day. I said, I know this is going to sound crazy, but you know that guy, Ian, that came? Yeah, I know him. Well, he told me that God said that you've been sexually abused. And Johnny ends up telling the whole story, admitting it all. And suddenly at that moment, you realized why he was such a troubled kid, because he had a horrible crime committed against him, and kids don't ever talk about those things. So he grew up with the pain of this, and of course he was sort of acting out because of it. And the cool thing about the story is there was another ministry that was, working with Urban Youth Impact that gave free counseling to kids who'd been sexually abused. So he ends up getting the counseling for a couple of years. It's really helped him work through a lot of things. And, it's just another instance of seeing God do a miracle in a kid's life. And I tell those two stories just to say that when you really go out and you step into whatever role God has put in your heart, you're going to see stories like that. It's not an anomaly. It's just a matter of getting out there and doing what God wants us to do. It's sort of like prayer, where with prayer, we're like, well, God, can't you just do this anyway? But the way God designed things, he wants us to pray. So he unleashes his power through prayer. And it's the same thing with serving and volunteering and getting involved in kids' lives. Where if you're out there and you're doing things and you're committed, you're going to see God move in inspiring ways. And I think Johnny's just a great example of that.